This episode of What's Going On with Shipping. It's the April 12th, 2022 edition of What the Ship, top 5 maritime news stories. I'm your host, Sal Mercaglia, and welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. If you're new to the channel, take a moment, please subscribe, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. And if you can, join our Patreon page to help support the channel, because not only are we the best maritime news source out there on YouTube, but we are the sharpest dressed. And I can guarantee you that every episode, you'll see nothing but impeccable dress from me, your host. Okay, well, that may not be 100% accurate, but still the best maritime news source out there on YouTube, guaranteed. So today we got a lot of stories to cover. So let's go ahead, me and my friends here, jump into story number 1. All right, story number 1. Whew, there's a lot of Sal's. Like nobody needs that many Sal's. Story number 1 deals with port infrastructure in the United States. So we've been talking about port infrastructure quite a bit. And one of the things you're hearing is expansion of ports, the dredging, the ship to shore cranes coming in, all those aspects. And in particularly, we've been covering 2 stories recently, the Ever Forward in the Chesapeake, and then the story of the Wanhai 176 off the west coast of the US. And one of the things I want to highlight are issues regarding those. So first off, Ever Forward salvage continues as we speak. They started to take the containers off the vessel over the weekend. They were able to get about 43 containers off. I showcased some of these images. I had the best source so far that I've seen are 2 right now, the Maritime Innovation Safety Lab site, which I'll have in the show notes, and then Deadrise Photography, who had the cover photo for today's video on there. They've been catching some great photos out there of what is going on. This story right here from Channel 11 News up in Baltimore is a great video showing the movement of containers off of Ever Forward right now. 2 barges with cranes have been brought into position now to work the ship. You'll see right here the removing of containers. They've already removed a batch of containers off the port side of the vessel, the left side of the vessel. This is the side furthest from the channel. The ship had a list to port, so they're trying to get some of that weight off, and they're removing 40-foot containers. The crane on the right is doing it on the very aft end of the vessel after the smokestacks. And then the crane on the left is about midships, about midway between the vessel. You'll see the house to the left. That's where the bridge and crew live. The bow is to the left. The stern is to the right. The channel is on the other side of the vessel. So they are removing these containers. And this is a kind of a very slow, methodical process to do this. These are 40-foot containers. They're using cranes to do this. Normally you do this with ship-to-shore cranes. But again, that ship is stationary when they're doing it. The cranes are mounted, and most importantly, they're able to fix the vessel so that they can adjust trim and stability. Here you have crews that have to manhandle the cranes. They actually have to, the containers. You'll see the tag lines on the containers, so they swing them around. These 40-foot containers can have anywhere between 5 to 30 tons of weight on them. So they are substantially big. They're moving containers pretty fast, I would argue. They're actually getting them off at a pretty good rate. The plan is to get about 500 off by the middle of the week next week, so that they can try on the high tide, the spring tide around the 18th, 19th, to go ahead and attempt another move of the vessel. They will keep trying to get these containers off. They're very weather dependent. Fortunately, they got great weather, flat calm today, for them to go ahead and get these boxes off. You'll see they'll put about 20 to 30 containers on each of these barges. The other story we have, and again, I got videos for both of these. You can go see the Ever Forward and the Wanhai 176. Wanhai 176 left Oakland heading up to Seattle. Now, this is a much smaller vessel than Ever Forward. This vessel is what's called a feeder vessel, typically operated in Asia, but was put onto the Trans-Pacific route because of the huge demand. Wanhai has been shifting ships onto this route. She sailed from Oakland. She's mainly empty. She just had some more loaded containers on board to go to Seattle. But most of the containers you see on board are empty. But shortly after leaving Oakland, lost power, started drifting in a gale that was blowing out of the northwest. But she was heading toward shore. The problem with the California coast is it's a cliff sticking out of the Pacific. The shoal water doesn't hit until you're very close. So she dropped one anchor, was not able to hold with that one anchor. She was what's called dragging the anchor, dropped the second anchor, and was eventually able to grab. Give you an idea of the conditions off there. There's the tug Delta Billy, and there's Wanhai 176. You'll see this is her with both her anchors set, something you don't typically do for fear of getting the anchors entangled. But it required both anchors to hold the vessel. The tugs could not get a line to the Wanhai 176 due to the gale conditions. This is rough water to be out in a tugboat. Let me be clear. This is whitecaps out there for tugboats you don't usually see. Usually you bring out ocean tugs for this, kind of deeper draft tugs to do this. These are more harbor tugs or tractor tugs. But again, the situation was perilous. This vessel could have easily gone aground. You don't know how close you came to a disaster off the coast of the headlands of San Francisco and Oakland. This vessel narrowly came ashore. And that's the key point I want to make here. We've had 2 incidents now where vessels either came aground or narrowly came aground. Fortunately, one of the tugs was able to get a line. The sea subsided just a little bit, down maybe about 5-10 knots. They were able to get a tow line. You'll see the tow line right there coming through the bits. And they were able to pull Wanhai 176 into the port of Oakland and get her anchored. All of this relates to the issue of the danger off U.S. ports, U.S. coast, with these large vessels and inadequate tugs, salvage, and firefighting equipment should accidents happen. This is the Zim Kingston. Zim Kingston was coming into Vancouver last year when she lost part of her container stacks collapsed. That initiated a fire on board. And that fire could have easily gotten out of control. The vessel been lost and sunk. But fortunately, in Vancouver, in that area, were 2 large ocean-going salvage vessels that were being used for ocean cleanup. You see one of them there being used right now. This operation required the cooperation of the crew, which, by the way, was ordered to abandon ship by the Canadian Coast Guard, but the crew refused, and they were able to navigate the vessel, keep the wind from running down the stacks and engulfing the rest of the ship, but also the fact that they had large salvage boats close by to provide massive amounts of firefighting capability, something that was lacking, for example, off the coast of Sri Lanka when the Express Pearl burst into flame and the vessel sunk right off the port of Colombo and has created a massive environmental disaster off that port. Same thing, the APL vessel, motor vessel, President Eisenhower last year, roughly around this time, was leaving the port of LA when she lost propulsion because of a fuel issue, narrowly came aground off of Santa Barbara. If it wasn't for the quick reaction of a tugboat out of Port Hueneme to get a tow line on her and pull her out, she would have been ashore in Santa Barbara. And then you have the case of the USS Bonhomme Richard in the port of San Diego, had a ship fire on board back in 2020. And the Navy just released a report that I'm doing a video on right now, which the Navy is not going to like, which talks about the fact that, well, you don't need fireboats. We have adequate fireboat protection in the harbor. You see right here, the fireboats that they initially used for this fire were police boats that could barely get water up onto the top deck. There are fundamental issues in our ports that we need to be addressed, and they should be addressed through certain mechanisms. So, for example, the Maritime Administration has what's called the Port Infrastructure Development Program, where they oversee port grants. A lot of that money from that $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill is through this. And the U.S. Maritime Administration should have a plan set forth that targets key infrastructure in ports, not just dredging and container cranes and moving cargo, but also safety features. And the question is, do we have those safety features? Because if you don't, if you have a ship like, for example, Everforward go aground and it didn't go out of the channel, but blocked the channel to Baltimore, you block 6 strategic sealift vessels in that port. If Wanhai 176 goes ashore, creates a massive environmental issue, similar to Express Pearl, for example, that will have catastrophic impacts on the United States. And, U.S. ports fall under a national port readiness network that should be more robust, in my opinion. Right now, ports are administered by states and municipalities. The federal government deals with waters, but what we need is more oversight of this and more direction in the allocation of resources, or else you're going to have a disaster that makes Ever Forward and One High 176 look like nothing. And that's the problem. We got to take notice of these warning sounds. All right, on to story number two. Story number two deals with the global supply chain, something we've been talking about quite a bit, but I want to put this in more of a context of multiple stories and how they relate. So this story from Bloomberg, U.S. container ship logjam shifts to East Coast ports. Great stories. I did a feature over the weekend on is global shipping heading into a recession. It was a counter to two stories from FreightWaves, one by Craig Fuller, one by Greg Miller. Great stories. If you want to see that full feature, just hop it right there. You'll see it. But one of the things we're seeing is the ocean shipping is not heading into a recession at all. Matter of fact, what we're seeing is more log jams. While the number of ships off the West Coast have decreased, we had 109 ships off the port of LA in Long Beach, now down to ships in the 30s. The East Coast has grown tremendously. And what we're seeing right now is a wave of ships coming across the Pacific after the Chinese New Year heading our way. That's going to hit US ports very hard, very soon. At the same time, over in Asia, we're seeing the impact of the COVID outbreaks and the shutdowns in the ports. Shanghai has shut down, while the port itself hasn't shut down. Trucks, warehouses, everything in the interior have shut down. And what this has resulted in is massive backlogs off the port, which we can see here with 477 bulk vessels waiting to get into China. These are ore carriers. These are grain carriers. All of them waiting to get into offload. They can't get into offload because the facilities are full and they can't haul that material out by road and rail because workers can't come in. This has huge ramifications. Now you're sitting there going, well, wait a minute, Sal. If things are slowing down in Asia, that should be a reprieve for the East Coast, West Coast yards. Well, yes and no. East Coast, West Coast yards like a steady flow. They don't like these pulses coming. And the problem is we're getting pulses, these waves. And these waves cause disruptions. Add to it that on the West Coast, we have a looming contract renegotiation coming. This story by Bloomberg, negotiations to start next month in high stakes labor talks at West Coast ports. The West Coast labor contracts expire at the end of June. Let's not wait for the last month. We won't wait for May or June to do this. Let's start April because we don't want last minute, shutdown of West Coast ports to be an issue. Now, I keep being told by the ILWU, they won't strike. They won't slow down. They will just operate under the old contract till a new one is done. But I got to say, they're creating a lot of uncertainty and doubt. And when you create uncertainty and doubt in freight and shipping, that increases costs. And all of this also plays into what's going on right now in the Black Sea. Increased insurance rates due to mines floating loose, due to the attacks on commercial shipping by the Russians, have increased the amount of cost to operate in the Black Sea to the point where many shippers are just not going into the Black Sea. They got to get war risk insurance. That's insurance above and beyond what they have. They may not be able to get sufficient war risk insurance to cover them, and therefore they're not going to risk their vessels. And so what we're seeing is a decrease in the amount of vessels going into Black Sea ports. This impacts Russia. This impacts Kazakhstan, Georgia, the Baku fields of oil. So oil, wheat, energy not coming out, along with Ukraine ports being closed. And, just on a side note too, we're seeing increased attacks right now on shipping in this area. Shipping casualties are on the rise. The Russians are hitting ships in ports, particularly the port of Mariupol, where a Dominica flagged vessel was sunk the other day. One of the crew members killed. We're seeing these attacks targeted. Now, how is all this impact on global shipping, freight, and everything? We had a discussion on Twitter, myself and a few others, with a Dr. Sarah Tabor. Sarah Tabor is down at Fayetteville, very close to me, as a matter of fact. And she is a crop scientist, and she posted this tweet thread the other day. More wheat stats. My personal favorite misleading wheat stat is, quote, Ukraine, Russia grow 25% of world wheat exports. Why is it misleading? It is technically true. Okay, it's not misleading then, but doesn't mean what people think. Missing wheat from the war is actually less than 1% of global wheat crop. True, absolutely true. Sarah's perfectly right on that. I agree with Dr. Tabor, 100%. But what she misses is, it's not a lot of the world wheat, but for a lot of countries, they import their wheat. And if they don't have wheat to import, then they're going to go short. There are already stories about Lebanon being short of wheat. Add to this the Black Sea issue, where you're not going to be able to export wheat out of Russia because of high insurance costs. Go here to the bulk ships stuck off the coast of Asia. And now all of a sudden you have the Bloomberg story here, how the $120 billion global trade is being redrawn by Russia's war in Ukraine. Dr. Tabor looks at crop yields, and she's right. The 25% of wheat coming out of Russia and Ukraine is less than 1%. However, if you don't have ships to make up the rest of that wheat, it doesn't do you any good. Yeah, India can increase production. The US can increase production. South America can increase production. But on the US West Coast, container liners aren't taking full containers. We can't get agricultural exports into those empty containers. They want to prioritize empty containers. The bulk carriers stuck off the coast of Asia are taking ships out of the trade, meaning there's not available ships now to haul wheat from longer distances, which mean you need more ships. It's not just tons, it's ton miles. And in South America, drought and conditions down there are seeing a shorter wheat haul. All this means that every little element here contributes to the global supply chain crisis. And that's what we're seeing. All right, jump to story number 3. So a story that blew me away this week was this one right here: tanker mega merger, Frontline and Euronav to combine in $4.2 billion deal. Belgian oil tanker Euronav and smaller Oslo-listed rival Frontline plan to merge in an all-stock transaction valued at $4.2 billion that they would cut costs and help in their low-carbon transition. Norwegian-born billionaire John Fredriksen, tanker magnate of epic proportions, the largest owner of Frontline and the second biggest in Euronav, said that the deal would establish a market leader and position the group for continued shareholder value creation. Now, the growth of the largest tanker company in the world is not going over well with everybody. This story right here from Sam Chambers at Splash 24/7. We don't need more of the same. Alex Savries on the battle for Euronav. Right here, after John Fredriksen launched an ambitious takeover bid of Euronav last week, the shipping line's largest shareholder, CMB, owned by the Savries family, had let it known it opposes the deal to combine Euronav and Frontline despite the backing of both boards. And so the fight here is to create the largest tanker company in the world. Now, understand, tanker companies used to be the ultimate shipping magnets. Post-World War II, the tanker market was dominated by the Seven Sisters. The Seven Sisters: Esso, Mobil, Texaco, Shell, Gulf, Standard Oil, and BP, American, British, Dutch companies. They controlled what was called vertical integration. They got the oil out of the ground, they refined it, they shipped it, and then they distributed it. But in the 1970s and 80s, there were a series of accidents where oil companies realized having your name on the side of a ship wasn't a good idea. Hello, Amoco Cadiz, Exxon Valdez. So they divested themselves of their tanker companies. And what you saw was the creation of these smaller operating companies, so that today there are 10 of them in the world, or the 10 largest in the world today. You have International Seaways, which is headquartered in New York. You have SFL Corporation, which is in Bermuda. You're going to see a lot in Bermuda. Navios in Piraeus, Greece. Sakos Energy Navigation in Athens. DHT Holdings in Bermuda. I told you see a lot in Bermuda. Frontline, Bermuda. Scorpio Tankers in Monaco, Euronav in Belgium, TK in Bermuda, and then Mitsu OSK in Tokyo. So if you bring together right here Euronav and Frontline, you are creating the largest tanker company in the world. And that means that one company would have the kind of lion's share of the distribution. We're kind of returning back to consolidation in the tanker market. And it's going to be interesting to see how that fight goes. Fredriksen is an absolute bull of a man when it comes to shipping. So I'm going to be interested to see if he can get his way and get that combined together. We've seen consolidation in containers. We've seen consolidation in cruise lines. We saw consolidation in tankers, then break apart. Now we're back to it once again. So let's go ahead and jump over to story number 4. So another story behind the scenes that needs to be talked about more is this one. Sam Chambers posted this story: $120 million worth of HSFO in Singapore found to be contaminated. So this is high sulfur fuel oil in Singapore is what they're talking about here. So this story really hits on a couple of key things. Singapore's contaminated fuel outbreak is likely to cost tens of millions of dollars and keep lawyers busy for years to come. Fuel tester VPS has confirmed a total of 60 high sulfur fuel oil consuming ships have been hit, with the fuel found to be contaminated with chlorinated hydrocarbons. All 60 ships bunkered with just 2 fuel suppliers in Singapore, the world's largest bunkering hub, with a total of 12 delivery barges in a time frame from mid-February to mid-March. The total VPIS has identified 140,000 tons of contaminated fuel worth some $120 million. Let me be clear. Since IMO 2020, the new fuel standard went in, we've seen rash of vessels losing power because of issues associated with fuel. And this just further confirms it. I go back to this story that was posted in Forbes by Nishan Dignarian, Shipping Gate, why toxic, very low sulfur fuel oil, Franken-Fuel, is such a danger for the planet. So Sam is talking about high sulfur fuel. Nishan is talking about low sulfur fuel oil. And both these fuel oils, the key was in January 1st of 2020, you had to shift over to this low sulfur fuel oil, or else if you stayed with high sulfur fuel oil, you had to use scrubbers. These are things that cleaned your exhaust on your ships. And in both cases, low sulfur and high sulfur, we're seeing issues with ships losing power, with engine room fires, with a multitude of issues associated with them. What this means is when ships lose power, and we've seen this happen with some container ships recently over last winter, where ships were losing power and then the container ships lose part of their stacks of containers because they lose power, they broach in the ocean, they start rocking in a way that they're not designed to do, and all of a sudden you get container collapses. All of this means that there needs to be greater quality control over the fuel that's going in our vessels. Because right now, the push to create cleaner, greener fuels is great, but are we putting poor fuels in our vessels, and that's leading to trouble? And that seems to be what is happening here. So that was story number 4. Let's jump to our last story, story number 5. So story number 5 involved myself and John Conrad at the U.S. Navy League Sea, Air, and Space Expo. Man, you guys are getting a lot of pictures of Sal today. I apologize. I didn't mean for this to happen. Anyway, John and I attended the Sea, Air, and Space Expo. I actually was a presenter. I presented on a panel on global supply chain. I want to thank the Navy League for that opportunity. But one of the things that was really missing, I thought, from the Sea, Air, Space Expo was a discussion on commercial shipping in large measures, and particularly commercial shipbuilding. And what I want to highlight is this story that GCAPTAIN put out the other day. Is Taiwan's Evergreen helping to finance China's naval expansion? We know a lot about Evergreen thanks to Ever Given and Ever Forward. But this report from the CSIS, and this is the report right here, I'll have it linked in here for you, is a really interesting one. It talked, again, this is the Center for Strategic and International Studies, in the shadow of warships, how foreign companies help modernize China's Navy. So Evergreen is a Taiwan-based company. That is the Republic of China. China, People's Republic of China, oppose each other. And we keep talking about how the People's Republic of China wants to take over Taiwan. Yet Evergreen, one of the largest Taiwanese companies, has most of their vessels built and serviced on mainland China. And this study in particular looks at how this is financing China's shipbuilding process, especially for the PLAN, the People's Liberation Army Navy. That's what the Chinese Navy is called. And you see right here that China controls 40% of the world shipbuilding. The rest is South Korea and Japan, and then the rest of the world splits up about 6%. But one of the things that this report does, and I really recommend you take a look at it, plus they have some great graphics in here, is they show, for example, at these shipyards, here is China's newest aircraft carrier, and then right alongside of it is basically a Evergreen vessel. Let me move my mug here so you can see this. An Evergreen vessel being built. And again, one of the reasons that China can build vessels at such a high rate and so economically is, number one, they subsidize the crud out of their shipbuilding. But second, they do this in conjunction with commercial shipbuilding. Look at the number of vessels being built here in these dry dock sections, pieces being built. This is what China has been able to do. Then you get this story from Lodestar, where they basically Evergreen denies, dismisses claims its bot ships orders could fund Chinese military. I don't know how they make this claim, but they do. They're basically arguing that basically it's not true, that you'll see right here, all Evergreen's container ship building projects are subject to an international public bidding procedure. In addition to China, our ships are built in Taiwan, South Korea, and Japan. That is true, but they're still being built in China. And the money going to CSSC is definitely being used to fund this. Then I want to add this issue. This story came up, was the announcement by the United States that they're buying 2 used roll-on, roll-off ships from a company called ARC, the American Roll-on, Roll-off Company, which is a subsidiary of Wallenius car carriers. These vessels are 24-year-old car carriers that were built in Japan, I believe. And they're going to be brought into the ready reserve fleet to replace some of the old vessels that are in there. So we're replacing 40-year-old vessels with 24-year-old vessels. The issue that had cropped up and is going to be a news story coming out here is this. Wallenius has ordered new vessels to replace these ships. And the place they're ordering them from is China. And so the $50 million that the US government just spent to buy the used ships is now going to go to be helped defray the cost of the construction of ships being built over in China. Now, does that money go directly to China? No, it goes to ARC. It's going to go to Wallenius, but the ships are probably already paid for in China with other money. But the issue here is Wallenius, ARC are going to replace their car carriers, and the guys that are building car carriers now is largely China. And in an indirect way, what we're doing with the purchase of used vessels is funding or giving the impetus to replace those used vessels with these. Now, understand, if ARC didn't sell those vessels to us, they still had to replace them. So they would still have to build those ships, and China is the best place to go because it's cheap, it's affordable. There's heavily subsidized. And so that's what's happening. The problem I want to highlight isn't the fact that money's going to China, which I don't think is directly true. Again, it goes through these holding companies and subsidiaries. It's hard to track. The problem here is that we're not building in the United States, and that is my issue. And listening to 3 days of the Sea, Air, and Space Expo, hearing about the highlights of issues with U.S. Navy shipbuilding, the reason that our shipbuilding is having such a hard time is because we're just focusing on building military vessels, Navy vessels. We're not building commercial vessels. And not only are we not building commercial vessels, we're not building enough of them. You can't build just 1 or 2. You got to build a batch. Japan does. Korea does. China does. We don't. And if you look at the yards that build the Japanese Navy or the Self-Defense Force, the South Korean Navy, the Chinese Navy, they're also building commercial vessels. We're not doing that. And that, to me, is the problem. Hope you enjoyed today's video. I hope you enjoyed the fact that I dressed up just for you people. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, give it a thumbs up, share it across social media. And if you can, hop on over to our Patreon page, join, and help support the channel so that we can bring videos like this to you and I can improve my wardrobe on a consistent basis. Until our next video, this is Sal signing off.